Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. A huge congratulations to the class of 2025. You did it. My name is Samara Berger. I am with the Office of Enrollment Management, and I am thrilled to welcome you to our Trailblazer session today. The future of work is learning with Dr. Nancy Gleason of NYU Abu Dhabi. Our hope today is that you will get a glimpse into our vibrant academic community and see for yourself why this place has become home for so many. And we hope you leave this session today feeling really inspired by our talented faculty and excited by the possibility of joining our rich, diverse community of thinkers, scholars, change makers, go-getters, and whatever you may be that fills in that blank. Before we get started, I do just want to share a couple of housekeeping tips. Please note that you will be muted throughout the duration of the session, but while we can't see you, we do feel your energy out there. We hope you stay engaged with us and stick with us throughout the duration of the session. And while we will not cover any admissions or financial aid info today, we do have folks who are behind the scenes answering any questions you might have that are relevant to this session. And if you have any questions that are relevant to your admissions process, please feel free to give us a call, send us an email. We're always happy to help you answer those questions or concerns outside of this session. So if you are interested in asking questions, you can feel free to use that Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And we will be sure to have some time for live Q&A towards the end of our session. So let's get started. I would like to introduce Dr. Nancy Gleason. Dr. Gleason is the inaugural director of the Hilary Ballone Center for Teaching and Learning and an associate professor of practice in political science at NYU Abu Dhabi. Her research focuses on the fourth industrial revolution's impact on higher education and the future of work. She considers societal impacts of education, employment disruption, continuous reskilling, and the role of industry in supporting upskilling of adults. She's the editor of Higher Education in the Era of the Fourth Industrial Revolution. She's the co-author of Diversity and Inclusion in Global Higher Education, Lessons from Across Asia. Dr. Gleason also holds a PhD from Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University, an MSc from London School of Economics, and a BA from George Washington University. In this webinar, Dr. Gleason will discuss the future of work is learning. Disruption is the new normal, and as the climate crisis and COVID-19 have made very clear, the fourth industrial revolution is a key disruptor that is changing how we live and work. Automation and the deployment of key emerging technological capabilities, such as the 5G network, distributed ledger technology, robotics, and AI, is changing what talent is in demand in the workforce. While pattern-based tasks inside jobs are shifting, causing significant changes in what competencies are in demand in the workplace. In some cases, this shift is happening very quickly. The future of work is about the ability to learn and pursue active learning strategies. Drawing on an interdisciplinary approach, Dr. Gleason will share her insights on the importance of active learning strategies and the willingness to learn for thriving in the fourth industrial revolution professional world. So Dr. Gleason, take it away.
Great. Thank you so much to everyone at NYU. I extend a very warm welcome to all of you students who are joining today from around the country or the world. I'm joining you from Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates. And I'm very excited to speak with all of you today about the future of work as it is learning. First, I'm going to speak with you all about disruption in general, particularly COVID-19 and the fourth industrial revolution. And then I'm going to talk about what this means for the future of work and what it means for learning. So we are disrupted. I'm sure you all feel this already, even as you try to normalize your life and get excited about going to college in the fall. We have major pressures on our societies. We have gender inequality. We have major demographic shifts within each country. And we have huge environmental and equity challenges that are encapsulated in the Sustainable Development Goals, but actually go beyond them as well, and include the disruptions of COVID-19 and future pandemics like it. So we are a disrupted society. It's not likely that we will settle into a generation-long routine again. We are permanently being disrupted, because the scale and the pace of the technology we're currently facing has not been seen before. You heard in my introduction that I study what's called the fourth industrial revolution. And some of you may be saying, but I thought there was only one. And that's a rather Eurocentric view, because many regions of the earth before we were all connected had their own industrial revolutions that create the scaffolding for what we understand as the British Industrial Revolution. But my point today is that any past industrial major shift that changed employment was about the automation of physical labor. And this industrial revolution is different because it's about the automation of knowledge. It's about the automation of cognitive tasks and pattern-based work. And that is why the fourth industrial revolution is different and why people are talking about it in a different way. So what is it? Essentially, it's based on the emergence of 8 new technologies with a few others coming very quickly behind it that will amplify them. But we have artificial intelligence, which is really cognitive intelligence. We have augmented reality, blockchain, which you may also know as distributed ledger technology. We have drones, the Internet of Things, robots, virtual reality, and 3D printing, also known as additive manufacturing. So on their own, these are very interesting technologies, but they don't necessarily change how we live and work. When you combine them, they do change how we live and work. Now, for example, robotics are interesting, but they're not very nimble yet, and they haven't been fully weaponized yet, and they can't handle unpredictable terrain very well, despite the videos we see from Boston Dynamics that go viral every few months. But when you combine robotics with artificial intelligence and machines that can make their own decisions, you have a weapon that changes warfare. You have a robot that changes the demands of society for an aging community or an aging population, for example, in Italy or Japan. So when you combine these, you have extremely powerful things. We also have new technologies that are on the horizon that will amplify these to a scale we actually probably can't wrap our brains around. So 5G network will make these different 8 technologies able to integrate with themselves almost instantaneously. Whereas right now, this is a slow processing world. The 5G network also makes soft haptics possible. And this is computing that's automated by touch. And the only thing that's slowing us down on that right now is the 4G network. So the 5G network capabilities enable us to move data so much quickly and so much more data that we'll be able to do very different things with computers. And eventually we will get to quantum computing. We're not there yet, but when we do, and I don't know when, I can't predict the future, when we do, the way we understand space, time, and each other will change. And probably with the emergence of quantum computing, what it actually means to be human will be questioned in new ways. We've always been questioning what it means to be human and what is humanity and what does it mean to flourish as a human and thrive as a human, and what happens when we deny people dignity and the opportunity to flourish and thrive. So those are questions that humans have been asking themselves for centuries, but quantum computing will change the ways in which we understand ourselves as a species. So what does this mean for the future of work? What does all this disruption, climate change, and all of these things? The infographic I'm showing you here, I appreciate is quite hard to actually read, but it's an interactive infographic that you can look up online. You can just Google where machines could replace humans and where they can't yet. And this interactive infographic will pop up for you, and you can mouse over your own country or a industry you think you're interested in working in. But what McKinsey did in 2017 was they collected information from 54 countries that made up 78% of the global workplace. And they tried to measure what percentage of jobs inside those working people were currently automatable in 2017. Okay, so what jobs being performed in 2017 were automatable? And what percentage of the work inside those jobs, I should say. And so what they found is that 328 million employees working in agriculture are currently working in automatable jobs. That's 50% of the global agriculture, forestry, fishing, and hunting industries. For manufacturing, it's even higher. 64% of the global workforce currently working in automatable tasks. For the biggest economies or the biggest populations or the biggest consumers, we're at pretty much universally 50%. So 395 million employees in China in 2017 were working in automatable jobs. India, 52%, and the USA, 46%. And for the globe, this is 1.2 billion people calculated by McKinsey currently working in automatable jobs, with a transition they see taking place by 2050. And this is only part of the story, but this is why people are alarmed. This is why there are talks every day about the future of work and the future economy, the digital economy, the automation economy. Are robots taking my job? And it's why you're wondering what you should major in college. How are you going to have an income? What is your job going to look like in the future? We know we don't know. We know we don't know what any of you are going to do. So what is NYU or any undergraduate experience going to be able to deliver? And what I want to tell you is that the story is more complicated than this infographic implies. Because the future of work is about a shift in skills and competencies, but it's not necessarily that all those jobs are going away. It means that what you do in the manufacturing industry changes, but we are in the midst of a major reskilling. And as the World Economic Forum calls it, a reskilling emergency. Because we need 1 billion people by 2030 to learn new skills and competencies. That's a major task of our societies. And this was anticipated in 2020, that by 2022, 42% of core skills required to perform existing jobs would change. And in the high-tech skills area is one area we know we have demand, but it's also about interpersonal skills. It's about emotional intelligence, skills related to sales, human resources, care for the elderly and those in need, and in the education sphere. What we know is that there's a shortened shelf life for some kinds of knowledge, and that this means everybody has to have lifelong learning and the willingness to learn new things, and the skills and the competencies to learn new things. The reason why that infographic I showed you a few minutes ago is incorrect is because the tasks inside jobs are changing. It's not necessarily the job title itself that's changing. And this is a book by some professors at the Harvard Business School who write for the Harvard Business Review that talk about what they call reinventing jobs, where larger firms are able to deconstruct the jobs that they currently have within their HR structures, human resources structures, and instead think about the tasks they need to perform, how they can optimize those to the goals of the organization, and I would add the ethics of the organization, and then everything else should be automated. And then you find employees that can be reconfigured, retrained, reskilled, upskilled, to perform those most important tasks that are not automatable. Everything that's pattern-based is automatable. Things that are not predictable are not automatable. But most likely the future workforce for firms that are fully plugged into that, and I fully admit there will be a lot that are not. There will still be jobs that are not plugged into this high-tech world because not everybody has access to it. Right? About 5 billion people do not have access to it. But in the middle class and white collar jobs in developed industries and in all developed industries, the combination will look something like this, where you have people plus spaces plus devices. And there will be a human machine interaction in the workplace that demands special skills. Cyber physical systems, CPSs, which are sometimes humans that are augmented with mechanical capabilities, or they are machines that are augmented with human capabilities. And so you can think about whether or not you would ever want to have a computer chip put into your brain to give you access to the internet. Right? This is called brain-computer interface, BCIs. And you may have already heard that Elon Musk is developing this through a firm called Neuralink, and they've already put chips inside pig brains. So some of this technology is far off. We're very far off to what we call singularity, for example, where artificial intelligence supersedes the human. But I have never heard anyone saying that it's not going to happen. I've only heard people debate about how long into the future it will take us to figure out how to do it. And then, of course, there's a lot of debate about whether or not we should do it in the first place. But there is this workplace environment that's emerging much faster than any other transition in the past, that if we don't work to understand very quickly, we won't be able to run our economies the way they're currently running. And the social contract in countries where individuals pay taxes will be broken. And so the accountability and the legitimacy between the state and the citizens would change in those environments. And in order to prevent that, if indeed that's the goal, which some people would like to see the capitalist system change, but how do we make this transition in a peaceful and organized way? And as an individual, what do you go out and do to just ensure you're not unemployed in 10 years? So these are the challenges we're facing. And for me, the future of work is about learning. And it's not just for me that I say that. A lot of people are talking about this. So I've already mentioned the World Economic Forum before. This is a very well-funded think tank supported by Klaus Schwab, who also hosts Davos annual meeting of the super wealthy and influential. But they collect data on the skills that are anticipated to be in demand in the workplace. And you can see here what's trending down in the declining column, the gray column, and what's trending up by 2022. And they released this data in 2018. But we see that from 2018, attention to detail and trustworthiness, coordination and time management fall off the top 10, and they are replaced by technology design and programming, and reasoning, problem solving, and ideation. We also see in this schematic that active learning and learning strategies moves way up to number 2. And these other things that are declining, they're not useless employable skills. They're just, this is where we see what we call hiring friction the most. The skills that are in demand, and what the actual talent pool has as a capability. And that friction is where they don't match up. And so what we see most in demand is active learning and learning strategies, which means there's not a lot of it in the marketplace. 2025, the latest figures have just come out from the World Economic Forum, and we see active learning stays at the top, which is interesting. Analytical thinking and innovation right up there. And I would argue you can't have analytical thinking and innovation without active learning and your own learning strategies. And these are things that were not on the corporate radar 5 years ago. This is because the pace of change in what you need to do in your workplace is every 6 months. They cannot hire people that need the skills and competencies and knowledge they need at a given moment, because they don't exist. Firms and organizations have to constantly train their own employees. And this is what we call lifelong learning. This active learning strategy is really lifelong learning. This is what higher education gives you. It's not to say you can't have it if you don't have the opportunity to go to college. Many people do. And it's fostered by their parents, by their communities, by their spiritual centers. But nonetheless, lifelong learning is defined by some key traits: curiosity, initiative, independence, transfer, and reflection. And I really like to emphasize transfer and reflection in higher education as key things that universities can help deliver, that then for those who do go into the workforce, they can use those skills to address novel situations. You can take what you majored in and apply it in a new field. So for example, my PhD is in climate change negotiations and public policy. I don't work in that space. I work in the foresight of education and what skills and competencies people need to thrive in a disrupted environment. So I transferred what I know about climate change, what it does to societies, and what you need to be resilient into the higher education landscape. That's the kind of shift you have to be able to make. And that requires what we call metacognition, thinking about your own thinking, thinking about how you can apply your previous experiences to new situations. This fosters the adaptability, the resilience, the agility to keep going in a changing environment. And this isn't just about work. It's about recovering from a Category 5 hurricane or typhoon. It's about building back your life when you lose a loved one. It's about being able to move to a new city and meet new people. It's about being able to handle difficult relationships in your life. So it is not just about the workplace. That resilience is required from all those disruptions I mentioned earlier. And it comes from reflection, journaling, writing, audio messages. However you do your reflection, you have to reflect on what you know. And the future of work is about taking that reflection and applying it to a new novel situation or problem. This means that employers have become educators in some places. This is an example from here in the United Arab Emirates and actually across the MENA region, Middle East and North Africa. If you're British, they pronounce it MENA. But Mujid Al Futtaim is a very large employer here in the Middle East. They own shopping malls. They own the Lululemon brand. They own all kinds of different types of experiences for people. And they have a leadership institute where they train their employees to understand how the whole brand is connected and how that means the brand has to shift. For example, when e-commerce replaces retail, they own shopping malls. So this is a very real challenge for them. And they have 40,000 employees that come through this center and learn about how to be creative, how to transfer knowledge from one industry in the firm to the next. So even after you leave university, or if you didn't have the opportunity to attend university or post-secondary education, the corporate university becomes important. Another example in the United States is Visa University. The most famous one is McDonald's, Hamburger University. But most large and even small and medium enterprise employers have their own in-house learning institutes. If they don't, they employ a burgeoning industry of vendors that do adult education. So what we're seeing, here's another example of GE in New York, which is number one for best corporate education site in the world through the Chief Learning Officers magazine last year, where they had a dedicated facility with amazing lifelong learning opportunities. And this doesn't just have to be in the white collar working space. You may have seen recently in the United States that Chipotle paired up with Guild Education to offer a 2-year associate's or a 4-year undergraduate degree to all of its employees that have been there longer than 18 months. So everybody is in on what we call the learning and development phase. Part of this is because post-secondary education has failed, either in the quality it delivers or the access it's been able to give. There's just not enough seats for all the people who have the right to attend. And so what we see is that the corporate sector is replacing the state in many countries, but especially in the United States, and taking on the responsibility of education and research. This is allowing firms to maintain competitiveness in their marketplaces and invest in their talent, but it also reduces government expenditure on education and science. This makes academics nervous. We don't necessarily want industry to decide what we study and know, because it only meets the objectives of one space. So post-secondary education still has a very important role to play. But an interesting trend about the future of work is that corporations are now educators. and they are fostering that very essential lifelong learning. It also means that when all of you hit the job market, if you tell someone in a job interview that you have the skills of lifelong learning, curiosity, initiative, transfer capability to novel contexts, problem solving, they are more likely to hire you. It's not just corporations that are on the front lines of lifelong learning. I'm a huge fan of libraries and librarians. And libraries all over the world, whether they're resourced like the one pictured here in South Korea, or much more minimal, they are creating spaces where adults and children can access knowledge outside of formal structures. So if you want to just go learn something new for the sake of learning something new, you can do that through a local library. Not everybody lives near one, but to the extent that these exist, and particularly when philanthropists and governments fund them, they are on the front lines of reskilling people that need free education to upskill and reskill. And my picture of the little 3D frog here is to also say that libraries give access to educational technology that many adults in particular may never have access to, because when they went to school, they didn't even have the internet. And now they have to work in an environment where students that are coming, when what we call fresh graduates are coming into the workplace, they've already worn augmented reality goggles and played video games on them for 3 years. So just digital natives have a very different perspective on this. And so libraries are a nice place where adults can go learn something new for the workplace or for their own gratification, for the value of living an examined life. And lifelong learning is also about MOOCs, right? We know that MOOCs are great if you're already highly motivated. They don't help the lower socioeconomic groups that need the support and infrastructure that a university offers. But they are extremely useful to somebody who already knows how to take advantage of those kinds of settings or has already gone through higher education. But anyway, certifications, badges in specific technical skills and competencies, formal master's degrees, executive education degrees, all of these things are absolutely required to stay employed in the fourth industrial revolution. And it's not enough to do them once. We have to do them regularly. I take courses and I find actually doing homework so annoying. It's given me new empathy towards the assignments I give my students. So adults as learners is something that's relatively new, right? The generation above me may not be used to that, right? They were told that a 4-year degree was enough to ride them out. But we also have longevity. Many of you on this call will live to 100, if not older, which means you're going to work to your 80, if not older, which means there's no way what you learn in the next 4 years should be sufficient. At very least to feed your curiosity, let alone to keep you thriving and employed. So these are the kinds of tools we have right now. That may change once we have brain-computer interface technology or other ways to get information quickly. But for now, this is some of the ways in which outside of the corporate structure, people beyond regular university age are still learning. So I want to emphasize and end on this point that none of this works if you don't practice self-care. The extreme environments caused by disruption mean that every individual has to learn how to take care of themselves, whether you do this through prayer, meditation, sitting silently and whatever you call that, and sleeping. If you don't take care of yourself, you can't be creative, you can't be curious, and so you can't thrive. If you don't take care of yourself, you're denying yourself the dignity you need to thrive. How can you ask someone else to treat you with dignity if you aren't taking care of yourself? So, I mean, of course you can, but part of it is starting with yourself. And to be a lifelong learner, your brain needs to restore itself every night. Your brain actually doesn't have fluid in it, but it has, we know only recently valves that get bigger and smaller during the day and the night. And when they're smaller at night while you're sleeping, it enables movement of things in your brain that don't happen when you're awake. And that's why you get the fog when you don't have enough sleep. You're actually literally, your brain is dirtier than normal. So you can't have lifelong learning without self-care. And sleep is the key one, but nutrition is second. We have a lot more control over our sleep than we do our nutrition. And lastly, I'll say what's needed to thrive in the fourth industrial revolution is ethics, because the changes that are coming because the technology that's emerging mean that a lot of times in the workplace, you will be presented with 2 or 3 options that leave some people or some parts of the earth worse off. And you need to know your own ethical north, and you need to work for a firm who clearly decides its ethical north in order to stay true to that. Because the ways in which we are tampering with the earth, with ourselves as a species, and with animals means we need to know where our ethical north is. And that's not universal. It's just not. I know people think that ethics are universal, but that's just because of colonial legacies. It really matters where your north is. And so my cautionary tale about the future of work is to practice your own self-care and make sure you check in with yourself regularly about your own ethics, because they may have to change based on the scale of the change we're about to see. So that is my talk for all of you today. I really look forward to hearing some of your questions in the chat and generally talking with you a bit more now.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gleason. This was such an amazing taste of what it's like to be in the classroom, especially being in the classroom with you. I feel like I have learned so much. I have several takeaways that I have to go and make sure that I am focusing on. And like you said, for our audience, please feel free to drop some of your questions in that Q&A box. We would love to hear from you. And I will get us started because I have a question that has popped into my brain. So you talked specifically about active learning and learning strategies as the kind of forefront of the skills that are being looked at, especially for this class of students that will graduate. And how do you feel like our students can be building and focusing on those skills as they're entering into the start of their college journey?
Right, this is an excellent and very important question. So what has worked for you in high school is going to have to be amplified in university life. It's not the same. And what's nice about NYU is that, and the NYU Global Network, is that we have infrastructure to support you. So learning strategies are things like, how do you organize your time? Do you have an app that shuts down your phone while you read? Have you ever been to office hours of a professor? And how are you going to approach that? Who could you ask about how to have effective office hours? Your librarians are a huge part of your learning strategy, because your learning strategy in part is about how do you collect information, and they're experts on that. And NYU has one of the largest library collections in the world. So we need those librarians to teach us about our learning strategies, about how we're going to go about doing that. So I recommend to students that are coming to university to think about what's worked for them in the past. How could they amplify that for the university environment where tasks become more complex, problem solving has more moving parts, but you're applying the knowledge you knew in high school to it. So your learning strategies are about how you organize information, how you organize yourself, how you use the university's infrastructure, the counseling office, the librarians, your own classmates, your RAs to help you thrive, because you're not supposed to do this alone. The whole infrastructure is there to support you, to help you have active learning strategies.
Yes, that is such an important point, and I think so important, especially coming to NYU, where you feel like, you know, you might be on your own island of one, but like we as a university love to support each other, to support our students, and there are so many resources for figuring out how to advocate for yourself and what might work for your learning style. And to kind of continue on that vein, one of our students, Maine, has a great question. Do you think it is the worker's personal responsibility to become more flexible in the labor market?
This is an excellent question. I think it depends what economy you're in and what your talent is. So there are some spaces where the firm has an obligation to reskill you, or the government, but it also has to depend on the type of economy you're coming from, whether or not the government has the money to do that. And so part of this is about context, but also part of it is about, you have to look around, and if no one's going to help, then you do have to do it by yourself. But this also sometimes, for some countries, some citizens, and some states within the United States, means navigating really complex websites by the Ministry of Labor or the whatever you call it in the United States. I can't think right now. Your employment offices that are run by the states. There are many states have reskilling options right now, for example, but the onus is on you to go pick one of those and want to do it. And so I think this is actually, the scale of the challenge is so huge. I think it's everybody's responsibility.
Absolutely. I think that's such a great point. And I think, as employers, we have to be paying attention to it. And then as active, career seekers, paying attention to what skills you can bring to the table, and where you also might need a little bit of extra support.
I want to add to that. I just thought of something else.
Please.
What we're experiencing right now, because of the way work has been automated so quickly, is that for the first time ever, we have economic productivity growth without job growth. That's never happened before. And it wasn't necessarily envisioned in capitalism the way Adam Smith and some of the, many of the pro-capitalism economists have designed it. So what you'll hear from someone like Bill Gates is that we should tax the robots, that actually industry doesn't get to scoop up all that savings from the automation of work. And that if my job is automated and I make $20,000 US a year, the company still reaps the profits of me being gone and the work I would have produced, and it doesn't have to pay my benefits. So the government should get my salary, and the government should be able to give that back to me or reskill me. And so this is the argument about the relationship between government and industry, as wealth is further concentrated within the firm and not the firm's employees. So I don't know if that was what your question was about, Maine, but that's an important point of this as well.
Absolutely. And Vaishali has, I think, a good follow-up to your point there. First, they loved your insights. She loved your insights. But do you think that this extreme automation might actually make people yearn for that personal touch and that personal insight again? And like, for example, the coffee machine being automated equipment, but people still like to go to cafes, get that taste of being around people, tasting different handmade coffees. Do you feel like that folks are going to be searching for that again at some point?
Absolutely. And I think the leisure industry is ready to take off as a result of the idea that people may actually have more free time on their hands. So for example, Europe is thinking one way to handle the fact that so much work has been automated and not wanting everyone to be unemployed is to move to a 4-day work week. So you'd have an extra day of leisure. And here you'd see people spending that extra day and spending the same amount of income with an extra day off to do things that involve really socializing. The problem is COVID-19 has made it clear that we're going to have to change how we socialize. So it's sped up the parts of our socialization that make us most vulnerable to disease. And what industries pop in its place may be delivered by automation, right? So soft haptics may enable you to have a play date, or your children, your future children have a play date with someone who's far away. My 6-year-old daughter played on Zoom for 2 hours last night, us in Abu Dhabi, another girl in Florida, another girl in Connecticut, and they played Roblox together via Zoom. So
I love that.
That made their human connection. And COVID, we would never have thought of it without COVID as parents.
Absolutely. Yes, there's definitely this piece that technology has bridged and created, like closed the gap in a lot of senses. But of course, there are new problems and new things that arise anytime we have a different system and a different setup of how we're operating. I feel like our students out there are just doing a great job of this next follow-up flow. Ranak has a question. Do you feel like the pandemic will continue to accelerate this remote and decentralized learning trends as hundreds of company executives are moving towards this hybrid work model even after the pandemic?
Yes, absolutely. So COVID-19 has definitely changed the future of work. It's made it clear to some industries how far behind they are, but it's also made clear to government ministries that they have to create more agile regulations to let these firms change quickly. It's also, of course, as we all know, really exposed the inequalities that exist in society, the unfairness of who has access to what opportunities. And so I think COVID-19 has sped up everything. And hybrid working models, yes, but also what, I'll give you an example. If you were an essential employee during COVID-19, then your job is most vulnerable because that essentialness became a weakness of the organization that employs you. So they're going to have to create backups to you. So we all know that our beloved grocery store workers were an essential role, had to play a frontline worker role in distributing food during the pandemic all around the world. This most likely will massively speed up automated tellers because it's too dangerous to have them in the workplace there distributing our food.
That's such a great example. And I don't know that one that, we would be thinking about so readily and so tangibly from this situation that we've been in. And Renak has a great follow-up question to that. So as developed countries age and, we kind of continue to deconstruct and reconstruct our social contracts, do you think robots and machines who don't pay taxes or spend on commodities, how do you think that will change or direct the future of the global economy? And how do you feel like we can handle that? Well, especially for those countries that are less developed and less capable of being able to input those technologies, like you mentioned.
Yeah, this is big. So it's not going to roll out evenly everywhere, right? Even climate change doesn't roll out evenly everywhere, right? There's more vulnerable and less vulnerable inside a country and across countries. What we will see is individualistic societies are much more likely to not adopt automation. So for example, in the United States, you saw that facial recognition software was outlawed in Silicon Valley, where they actually created that software and capability, whereas it's a major policing tool in China these days. And so more individualistic societies are less likely to accept governance processes happening with automation, and more collectivist societies it's much easier for them to do this. And so if you look at India, though, the largest democracy in the world, in 2009, they passed what's called the Aadhaar Act. And it's got a lot of controversies. I'm not necessarily advocating for it, just telling you what it is. And part of that was biometricing the entire population, in part because they knew that there was millions of babies born outside of the formal system. And you can't have universal basic income or proper social protection in place for the automation economy if you don't know how many citizens you have. So they fingerprinted and scanned the irises of everybody in the country. And they found 300 million people that weren't accounted for before that. They had a sense they were there, but they didn't know how large the number was. And you may have seen in the news that several years ago, they attempted to go cashless as a result. Eventually, we'll all go cashless, but you have to have this other infrastructure in place to do so. Which countries do it first, how and why depends on so many different domestic factors. Financial endowment is definitely one of them. But it's not going to roll out evenly, and unfortunately, it will most likely mirror inequalities and injustices we already have in place. So for example, one colleague at NYU Abu Dhabi, Professor Taboho Moja in the school Steinhardt, mentioned that trying to fix the education system within South Africa is like trying to unscramble an egg. So how can we fix the education infrastructure to create lifelong learning when there's legacies of apartheid in place that keep the majority of learners out? So these are the kinds of things that make it different across different countries.
So important. And I think, as we have this incoming class of students, these are issues that you can be studying, that you can be, deconstructing and peeling back the layers of, and really working towards resolutions and a little bit more of that equity that we're looking for. We do have a couple more questions. I know we're getting to time, so I'm gonna try to ask these two quickly. You're getting a ton of compliments, by the way, about the engagingness of your presentation. So hats off to you. But do you feel, this is from Shajia, do you feel like the fourth industrial revolution will make learning new languages more or less important? And do you think that, you know, how we communicate across industry, across borders, will our lack of interest in learning those languages create more barriers between developed and underdeveloped countries?
So my short answer is no, but the reason why is complicated. You will be able to instantly translate any language, so learning it is not so important. My concern with not learning the languages is that you miss all the very important cultural knowledge that comes with learning another language. What's it like to go to a marketplace in a different place, and so on and so forth. And we lose the ability to, I'll rephrase and say, we still need, even if we aren't learning new languages, we still need to come up with ways to understand each other. And one of the ways we've been so good at doing that, admittedly, we're not great, we've still improved over time, is through learning foreign languages or multiple dialects. And actually, we know that you grow more gray matter in your brain as a polylingual or bilingual speaker when you grow up bilingual or speaking multiple languages. So I think I'm not worried about being disconnected from people who speak less frequently spoken dialects and languages, because we will have Google Translate and all kinds of amazing technology to help us communicate. But I am worried then about where, when, and how do we get information about cultures different from our own, so that we can make sure everyone feels like they belong in this connected world.
Absolutely. And I imagine that goes to your point previously about finding your ethical north and your personal ability to be able to communicate across your own boundaries. All right, so one more question. I apologize for those folks if we're not able to get to all of your questions, but I think this is a great one to end on. So totally different direction. How do you suggest that people go about self-care when there are so many demands in the workforce, whether it's in finance or medicine or even nonprofit, you know, working 40, 80, 100-hour work weeks? Do you think that tech integration is going to change that work-life balance at all? And I upvote that 4-day work week wherever the voting is happening. I fully support the 4-day work week.
Yeah. Yes, I think I would not pursue a career that demanded a 100-hour work week. Life's too short. Myself. I think what is required of self-care is an individual question. We struggle with different things: anxiety, difficult parents, different dyslexia. It doesn't have to be totally debilitating. It could just be something that makes us different. But self-care, I think, is about knowing when something is too much and taking a step back. It doesn't mean walking away and quitting. It means taking a reset. And so self-care is understanding your role in context. So if your job is to do X and your boss is asking you to do A, B, and C, then you need to reconfigure the conversation around your role in context and be a self-advocate. Same for relationships that aren't working well. I always see these images on Twitter and other social media platforms saying, like, if someone's toxic in your life, walk away. Well, it's not always that simple. But you do have some agency, especially if you have the opportunity to have higher education, to choose your career path. And remember, you're going to have 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different careers. You may want to go to medical school and not be a doctor. You may want to go to law school and never be a lawyer. That's part of what this is. How can you apply your legal skills to the higher education consulting industry? How can you apply your deep chemistry skills to problem solving in environmental negotiations? Margaret Thatcher had a PhD in chemistry. So she was able to shift those skills to something very different. You don't get a PhD in political science to be a prime minister. Well, maybe you do. I don't know, but that would be odd to me. So I think it's about resilience. It's about agility. And some things are going to knock you down harder than others. It's way more about how you get back up than what knocked you down. And the how you get back up is the self-care toolbox. And you can add to that anytime you like. But there's resources at a place like NYU Abu Dhabi that help you know what those tools even are, right? I think of it as like turning on the features in a complex software. This whole infrastructure is designed to help you figure out what the tools even are to practice self-care. But unfortunately, the disruption's not going away. So to make yourself fit for that, it's about having a network of people that support you and constantly changing and growing that network. It doesn't have to be personal, it can be professional, but it has to be constantly growing and changing. Use LinkedIn professionally, figure out how to use it. Connect with me on LinkedIn. If we've just had this conversation, message me and add me to your network of infrastructure of support. So self-care is a lot of different things for different people. Many people in the world, it comes exclusively from their house of faith and worship. Other people, it comes from exercise. Other people, they don't have anywhere that it's coming from and they're not practicing it. And I guarantee you, if you're on this call and you don't have a list of things you currently do for self-care and you're just fine, that may change. I guarantee you it will change if you choose to have children, because you won't sleep for about 10 years. So the other parts become really important because you lose the sleep part. So I think anybody is strong enough to survive the crazy things that life throws at us. But not everybody has the opportunity to learn what those tools and features are. And if you come to NYU Abu Dhabi, it's about finding those things out in the relationships you build in the dormitories or in your classrooms or with your professors and the librarians and the amazing staff you work with. And everything that's outside of that your employer can offer as well.
Oh, such sage advice. And I could ask you questions and listen to you all day long. And I think our students out there probably feel pretty similarly, because this, this is a huge transition. It's time to leave your high school self behind, like you said, and kind of take on new skills, learn about yourself, and find that ethical north and what that means to you. And knowing about the culture of where you're studying, where you're working, all of that is going to be really important in finding yourself and being able to balance all of those things. So a huge thank you again, Dr. Gleason, for a truly wonderful session. Thank you so much for being here, for joining us and adding to our Trailblazer series. A huge thank you to our audience. We loved having you. We loved your questions. Like I said, if we did not get to everything, please reach out to us. If you have any questions about the next steps of your admissions process, you can reach out to us at admissions@nyu.edu. If you're specifically an NYU Abu Dhabi student, please feel free to reach out to NYUAD.admissions@nyu.edu. And similarly, if you are an NYU Shanghai student, shanghai.admissions@nyu.edu. And of course, follow us on all the social channels at Meet NYU. We have tons of other things going on until we can officially welcome you to campus in the fall, wherever you may be joining us. Please be sure to check out additional virtual options. I'm dropping a link in the chat for you now. We have a few things that are happening this week as we wrap out April. And again, congratulations. You did it. All your hard work has paid off. With that, we thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to welcoming you to the NYU family very soon. Bye-bye.